I'll start with a question. Should Christians be battling the same struggles and the same battles that non-Christians are fighting? Should Christians be fighting in the same battles that non-Christians are fighting? The battle I'm referring to is the battle of fear, anxiety, discontentment, pride, unhappiness, and on and on. And if a believer, someone who has rooted their trust in Jesus, is battling these things, let me suggest it's because of the same reason. And that is that they share a false belief with non-believers. And by false belief, I mean this. A Christian might believe that God forgives some people, but he can't forgive me. My sin is too treacherous. My sin compared to others, maybe I should have known better, but my sin is too great to be forgiven. And this belief, fundamental to this belief is that Jesus' grace has its limits. It reaches some people, but it doesn't reach all people, depending on what you've done and whether or not you should have known better and so on. So it essentially magnifies, it elevates, and it focuses on the gravity of my sin rather than the magnitude of Jesus' sacrifice and his grace. And so what happens? So if I believe that I can't be forgiven like other people can, I find myself avoiding God himself, avoiding conversations with God, especially avoiding gathering with God's people, because I know that it's going to bring with it a sense of shame and a sense of guilt that other people are kind of singing and praying and they're enjoying God, but I can't because I'm already estranged from him because my sin's so bad. And so that false belief drives behaviors, and those behaviors tend to be isolation, withdrawal, avoiding God and the church. A person who believes their sin is beyond God's forgiveness avoids approaching God in any kind of conversation. Certainly avoids reading the Bible. Why would I fake it as if somehow I'm forgiven to then have the boldness to read the Bible or attend church services? And essentially, my guilt and shame leads me to a sense of rejection among God and his people. My false belief under the surface leads to behaviors on the surface. And if I share those false beliefs with a non-believer, I'm going to have the same outcomes: guilt, shame, sense of rejection. So, as that person starts to suffer the consequences, they feel stagnated and isolated, and they ignore the biblical truth that God's grace is infinitely more than you could think or imagine. And that grace is not limited to how bad your own sin is. That his forgiveness has the power, the unique power to restore, to bring restoration and reconciliation to your relationship with God. His forgiveness, his grace makes that happen. But if you believe these truths about God, if you believe these truths, I'm going to run 4 of them by you today. Over the years, you've come across these. If you've been around some of our teaching here among the church family, you have come across these beliefs about God, these truths. But if you believe these 4 truths about God, your emotional and your spiritual health dramatically changes. It dramatically changes, and that is this: that God, his character, his attributes, that God is uniquely, supremely great, he's glorious, he's good, and he's gracious. And if you believe those things, and you're a believer, you remember I've mentioned this several times, but when Jesus was telling the disciples what work that they had remaining to do you remember what he told them? He said, here's the one thing I leave for you to do. Believe. You believe. Focus on your believing right deep down in your believer, and that's the work you do. And when you believe, your actions will follow. Your actions will follow what you believe. How many of you have ever been using your GPS and you see on the path, on your particular path to your destination, you see that there's a part of your path that lights up red, and red usually means traffic has stopped. And because you believe traffic has stopped, what do? Reroute, right? I'm going to go a different direction. And the only reason that you're rerouting and the only reason that you're changing your direction is because you believe something is true about your path to your destination. So I'm suggesting to you today that if you believe that God is great and glorious and good and gracious, that it'll change your direction. It'll change how you function in your life. And each truth about God subverts a false belief. Each of these truths about God kind of undermines the beliefs that might be driving your unhealthy behavior or your unhealthy attitude or your unhealthy decisions. And these truths provide a practical and gospel-centered framework to address common human fears, common human ailments and shortcomings, and unhealthy kinds of thinking and